Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome. Thank you for coming out to listen to us this afternoon. We are going to be discussing today a very diverse set of ideas under the broad canopy of what can be called identity politics. I have with me three absolutely brilliant, wonderful writers with a substantial body of work. So I'm going to skip a lengthy introduction to contextualize the talk and jump right to it. Just one thing to note, I've opted for a slightly unorthodox structure for this conversation. Instead of going round the panel asking each one question at a time, I'm going to start with one writer, ask them a couple of questions, and then go on to the next one. I feel like that will allow them to be able to build their arguments in a way that provides some value in such a short time. So do bear with me on that. Right, so the immediate pretext to this conversation is, of course, Yascha's brilliant book, The Identity Trap, the story of ideas and power in our time. Congratulations on the book, Yascha. And I would like to begin by asking you very briefly, the premise of the book hinges on the fact that the worldview of the ideological, cultural, political left has shifted over the last couple of decades, or perhaps slightly longer than that. Could you begin by telling us what this shift is?
Yeah, so, I grew up in Germany, and at the time, there was a big political debate in a relatively homogeneous country, certainly much more homogeneous than India is, about how to accommodate increasing diversity, immigration, and so on. And it was the political right that said, we are defined by the groups into which we are born. The community you're born into is really what defines you. When foreign cultural influences come in and change our country, that's something we should be worried about. These immigrants coming in from different ethnic groups, from different religious groups, we can't really understand them, they can't really understand us. And it was the political left, which I was a part of and remain a part of, which stood up for humanistic and universalist values. That said that of course identity is important, of course it's important what group you're from, and of course we have to be on the guard against discrimination and injustices against minority groups. But our values are that we are able to communicate with each other, find meaning in each other, that I'm able to come to this wonderful country and meet many people, and even though your experiences are different from mine, we can enter into a real conversation with each other and learn from each other. And that was a lot of what attracted me to the political left. And as I went to university in the United Kingdom and then to do my PhD in the United States, I was struck by the fact that a new set of ideas, supposedly on the left, that have come to dominate big parts of the political left in the United States, in Germany, in many countries around the world, are rejecting these ideas, are saying, no, actually, you're deeply defined in the United States by the ethnic group into which you're born, by your sexual orientation, by your gender identity. And not just that this shapes part of who you are and that we should be respectful towards it, which I of course agree, but that, for example, we should be very much on the guard against anything that might be described as cultural appropriation. That when a member of one group is inspired by the culture of another group, perhaps creates fusion cuisine. Yesterday we were invited to a wonderful dinner here in which one of the things that was served was burrata, an Italian cheese with Indian spices, which was wonderful, right? But when you do that, perhaps that's a form of cultural appropriation that we might need to be worried about. We've started to see the rise of cultural customs that really worry me. So, for example, in a lot of elite American private schools now, teachers come into classrooms when children are as young as 8 or 7 or 6 years old, and they split these kids up by ethnic group. So they put the black kids into one group, and the Latino kids into a second classroom, and the Asian kids into a third classroom, which includes Indians and Chinese, as though those two cultures were somehow identical. And then the white kids into a fourth classroom. And the idea is to encourage this strong form of racial identity in the minority group so they can stand up against injustice. And for the white group, the idea is that children are supposed to learn to identify as white so they can give up their white privilege and fight for a more just society. But that, I think, is a really naive idea of what is going to happen. Because one thing that we've learned, or should have learned from history and social psychology, is that how we define our group, how do we define ourselves, really depends on the context. But once somebody tells you, this is the most important thing about you, this is the group that defines who you are, you're very likely to fight for the interests of this group and against the interests of other groups. So we're encouraging a form of zero-sum competition between these different communities. And the white kids, I think, are more likely to be encouraged to become racists or white supremacists by being separated out in this way than to become these great anti-racists who are fighting for a more just society. So that's why as a left-winger, I'm worried about the way in which the Western left has been transforming in the last decades.
The standpoint that you speak of is often derogatorily referred to as woke ideology, and it's such a commonplace phrase in our times, and yet there is such a woolly understanding of what it really means. You use the term identity synthesis. Tell me about what made you pick this particular phrase, coin it rather, and perhaps also how do we understand these ideas that you're talking about? Because you write so wonderfully about how you can trace a lot of these ideas back to postmodernism, post-structuralism, post-colonialism, to writers as diverse as Spivak, Foucault, Edward Said. But they were ideas in academic ivory towers. How did they breach them? How did they become so commonplace as to become the dominant discourse?
Yeah, yes, the sort of most commonly known term for this ideology is woke. There's so many unsubtle critiques of woke ideas at the moment, so much railing about it, that when you keep going on about the term, you sort of are in danger of sounding like an old man shouting at the clouds. So I try to avoid the term. I call it and the important thing here is just that we get a term that people who like these ideas and people who dislike the ideas can agree on, right? So some of you may be socialists, probably the government claims that all of you are socialists. Many of you may not like socialism, but we can all agree to call a certain ideology socialist. Whether we like it or not, we can agree on the term. I think we need a neutral term for this ideology as well, so we can actually examine it and think about it seriously. So I suggest the identity synthesis because it is indeed a synthesis of these traditions you mentioned, of postmodernism, first of all, post-colonialism, and then critical race theory. And so it takes from somebody like Michel Foucault a deep skepticism about the idea of universal values or neutral truths. It takes from somebody like Edward Said the idea that the way to do politics is to critique political discourses and change and transform them, and that's going to bring about political changes. It takes from Gayatri Spivak, the great Bengali literary theorist, who came to distance herself from her own term, the idea of strategic essentialism. The idea that even for philosophically speaking, it may be suspect to say you're really defined by some group. For practical political purposes, we should encourage people to lean into their identity so that they can fight injustice in a more effective way. Interestingly, Spivak came to reject her own term, in part because she saw, and that's perhaps one connection to the rest of this panel, how the Hindutva movement was using strategic essentialism for its own majoritarian purposes. And then from critical race theory, you take both a deep skepticism about the possibility of making political progress. So this is a claim by people like Derek Bell that America today is as racist as it was in 1950, as racist as it was in 1850. They would say that a society like India is as discriminatory towards lower castes, or as discriminatory towards sexual minorities as it was 100 or 200 years ago. And then the idea that the solution to this is not to live up to our more universal principles, but rather to make how people are treated explicitly depend on the kind of group they're from. And that, I think, taking all of these ideas together, you can boil them down into three basic principles that now animate a lot of this ideology, right? And that's the first of which is, the key way to understanding the world, the key way to understanding our social interaction, the key way to understanding political events, political revolutions, is always through the prism of identity, of race, gender, and sexual orientation. The second is that any set of universal values, like those enshrined in the Indian Constitution, are just an attempt to pull the wool over people's eyes, just an attempt to fool them so they don't see the injustice. And that explains why we haven't been able to make any social progress. And so therefore, the third point is, in order to make progress, we always have to be hyper-conscious of each other's identities. Rather than aiming to treat each other as equals, we should always treat each other on the basis of a group to which the other person belongs. And that, I think, is really the core of this ideology.
The final question I'm going to ask you for now, Yascha, to complete the arc of this conversation, is that you, like you said right at the beginning, you belong to the political and ideological left yourself. You are a left-wing person. And we live in very tricky times when the term woke is used derisively. It is used to dismiss injustices that are very much present amidst us. And it's being used by right-wing populists who are on the rise almost everywhere. In this context, in these times, you have built a constructive critique of what is failing the left in terms of its point of view. What are the challenges of building this critique, and why did you think it was so essential to talk about this trap? Because you don't deny the injustices that are the bedrock of it. You suggest an alternative path.
Yeah, so, I acknowledge that the motivation of many of the people who've bought into this ideology is to fight against injustices that are real. Of course, in the United States today, racism persists. Of course, there's discrimination against sexual minorities. Of course, we still have to fight for more inclusion of trans people. But I don't think that the way to make historical progress is to reject the connections between us as human beings, is to lean into what always has been a right-wing concept, which is that you're deeply defined by the group into which you're born. I think there's good historical reasons for that. When you look at how African Americans have been able to make progress, for example, what kind of values people like Frederick Douglass or Martin Luther King appeal to in history, the answer is very clearly universalist values. So Frederick Douglass, in his famous speech about what to the Negro is the 4th of July, pointed out the hypocrisy of fellow citizens of his who were celebrating the idea that all men are created equal at a time when slavery was still a reality in the United States. But he didn't say, therefore, we should reject the idea that all men are born equal. He said, if you mean those values seriously, then fight to realize it, then fight to actually put it into practice. And that was the argument that helped to make grand political progress. The same was true of Martin Luther King, who said the promissory note issued by the Bank of Justice is fraudulent. America has never lived up to its promises to African Americans. But now it's time for the Bank of Justice to cash that check, not to rip it up. And so that's one important point. The other important point is that, at a superficial political level, these two ideas may be in competition with each other, wokeness on the one side and right-wing majoritarianism, whether in the form of Donald Trump or whether in the form of, respectfully, Narendra Modi, seem to be opposites to each other. But in practical political terms, they actually reinforce each other. So when you look at the United States, it was after Donald Trump, it's because in part of these ideas that Donald Trump was able to win in 2016. It was Trump's victory in 2016 which made it very, very hard in places like my university to argue against these ideas without being painted as some kind of right-wing stooge. And that's what allowed these ideas to become so influential so quickly. And then today it is because of the hold of these ideas in major American institutions and the way in which people have stopped trusting those institutions that Donald Trump is currently ahead in polls for November 2024 and looks like he's likely to win. So I think there's a false choice between either fighting what I call the identity trap or standing up to right-wing populism. The best way to stand up to right-wing populism is to stand for more inclusive values that actually are capable of winning social majorities. And then the final point I want to make is just sort of on the substance intellectually. I laid out the three main components of this ideology. I think that there's a way of taking injustices seriously, of acknowledging the kernel of truth in some of these ideas without throwing the baby out of the bathwater, without fully embracing this. And this is to say that, number one, yes, of course, identity is important to understanding the world. Of course, each person in this tent, in this room, in this front lawn, I suppose, is shaped by the groups we're from, by the religious convictions we may have, by our parents, by our cultures, traditions, rituals, culinary traditions, and so on and so forth. That's a wonderful thing, right? One of the things that makes India so wonderful is its diversity. And that's true today of New York City and of Berlin and of Paris and of so many places around the world. But there's also other dimensions. You're not just defined by that, right? We're also defined by social class, by shared patriotism perhaps, by our individual inclinations and idiosyncrasies, our talents, our tastes, our humor. So instead of understanding a situation by imposing one view of it, we have to go to the situation and see which prism is most useful, right? The second point, which I was making a moment ago, is that to make progress, we have to live up to these values. That's the only thing that's going to get us out of that zero-sum conflict. And when you look at the progress that India has made in the last 50 years, when you look at the progress that the United States has made in the last 250 years, when you look at why our societies, for all of their deep flaws, are less imperfect than they were in the past, it's because of our attempts to live up to these values. And so we have to double down on that. And then very briefly, the very last thing I'll say, and that I think connects it to the rest of this conversation, is that the instincts that are served by this ideology are the same as the instincts of majoritarianism, right? It's just human tribalism to say, my group good, your group bad. I'm going to fight for what's mine and I don't care about what's yours, right? And so if on the one side we celebrate that and the other side we condemn that, that's not coherent and we're going to get into a dangerous political dynamic. The only way out of it is to say, yes, I have my group and I'm going to look out for its interests, but you know what? I recognize that I also have something in common with you and with you and with you, and what we need to build is a constructive politics that is based on those things that we have in common and that mutual equality and consideration.
Brilliant. Thank you, Yascha. Moving from the left spectrum to the right, or rather, as Yascha would put it, to the other side of the coin. Badri ji he's a poet, he's a social scientist. A lot of his work, in fact, relates to this topic. But for the purposes of the 3 minutes that I've been given, I will probably focus on his book, The Republic of Hindutva, How Sangh is Reshaping India and India's Democracy. बद्री जी आपने एक बहुत ही अच्छा फ्रेज़ यूज़ किया था अपने एक लेख में, the Hindutva chalk circle. I imagine it was a reference to the Caucasian chalk circle. And in that, in the essay, you argue that Hindutva has come to be the dominant position, ideological position in India's polity and politics. Could you tell us about why you argue this?
Thank you, Pragya, and thank you, Jailif. Actually, why I'm saying that doesn't need an argument. You see the reality. No? Hindutva came in the center of the politics, but they came in the center of politics through an argument and logic, and the philosophy, and that logic, argument, and philosophy, they are not defensive about that. They are doing whatever they are doing since 50, 70, 80 or 100 years. So because and the others, those who are doing, they are also chalk circle is that you have to play your match within the same circle. In the same ground you have to play your match. And Hindutva politics has set a ground and you have to play your match in that. So everyone, those who were claiming themselves secular, now they are compelled to do that kind of political posturing. But the problem is the authenticity. Who are the authentic in doing that? Who has a authentic for that claim? And for acquiring authenticity, I think you have to remove contradictions in your logic and the praxis, in your theory and the praxis, in your argument and the politics. Whatever the Hindutva politics, the broader Hindutva politics, the great narrative, meta-narrative of Hindutva politics, those who claim for that, they don't have that kind of any confusion. So they are very clear in their argument. They are extending that argument from A to Z, not A to B, C. And the others, Congress, Aam Aadmi Party, other political group forces, those who are coming with saying, no, we are also doing Hindutva politics, going to temple, Hanuman Mandir, Hanuman Prarthana. But they are after certain time A, B, C, no, we are secular. No. we are secular. So, and the way they define secular means the no connection with any religion in theoretically. But theoretically, I think, but in practice, when they go, they do all these things just to get, give a posturing. So they don't get create trust value, not able to create trust value among public. Secondly, they fail to give a message that there is no contradictions, no confusion in their argument and their praxis, in their logic and their politics. So in that way, in this chalk circle, there is a center, and that center asks you for authenticity. You have to be clear that what you are going to do, either right or wrong. You have to take position, and position without any confusion. And they have taken very clear position. They are extending it to the development, to caste, imbibing caste also within Hindutva frame, because the entire political mobilization process, if you see, led by the Sangh and the BJP, Sangh mostly, is including as much as possible. As much as possible. Everyone who wants to come, they go and they come, bring them, and they redefine themselves. That's why I'm saying in that book that RSS has no foundational base, no foundations, foundational element. They always try evolve themselves, they recreate themselves, modify themselves to get adjusted with other for inclusion. You can say appropriation, it's up to you. But I say inclusion also. So a caste, many Dalit caste, if you go and you see their work, Seva projects, Swas, Siksha, Safai, through that they are entering in them. Also they are bringing their icons, their heroes, their deities in their politics. You must remember Narendra Modi lecture, in one of the lectures which he gave in Lucknow, and he mentioned a hero, a deity, that name was Mari Devi, Mari Mai. No, he mentioned the name of the deity, Mari Mai. If you ask from yourself, how many know Mari Mai? No one knows. But Narendra Modi is using that Mari Mai in that location, where Mari Mai is very popular. In every village you can find temple of Mari Mai. So that kind of understanding of Indian culture, traditions, and using them in the political mobilization for extending their politics from A to Z. And others are not able to extend from A to Z. They are going to B, C, D, and then stop. Because their conscience, because they live with that argument, no, we are secular. Don't allow to go on that line, go further.
Badriji, one thing that I wanted to, I completely hear what you're saying, but, and while within this chalk circle, Hindutva or the proponents of Hindutva are the most authentic, clearly, because they have set the defining pole position. However, there is no ideology that doesn't have its own contradictions. And nothing brings out the anxiety of contradictions within Hindutva more than the caste question, because of course there's been an attempt to include different castes from at least the 80s onwards, 90s onwards with Samajik Samrasta Manch and so on and so forth. But at the same time, not all caste groups, and particularly those who have been active in fighting for rights over, the last God knows how many decades, would be entirely comfortable with the Sangh's position on caste. You have done work with caste identity groups back in the 90s, perhaps further back, and up until now. What is it that's really substantially changing? It's one thing to do outreach, but it's another thing to be able to actually change so much of, and again, I'm not saying this is the position of all caste groups in India, but the fact that caste fault lines have been altered by Sangh politics is not something that we can deny. What has led to this?
Pragya, it's a very good question. Actually, you see, any politics which have to become successful, they have to go deeper to everyone who aspires for coming to the political circle. But there are very few marginal communities, those who have a capacity to aspire for the politics. Like if you see among Dalits, we have 66 Dalit community in Uttar Pradesh. And if you ask how many Dalit castes do you know, maybe 4 or 5, not more than that, because most of them are invisible. So what BJP invisible, because they don't have acquired the capacity to aspire. But what BJP does is trying to, or Hindutva politics does, is trying to explore such kind of unexplored political potential of those communities, bringing them in the circle of developmental distribution of development benefits, and also trying to give them participation in the politics. That may be a positioning also. I'm not saying this is a, ये मन से कोई politics में कोई भी मन से नहीं करता. Politics is just a kind of, whatever you do is a strategy. It's not a puja path and adhyatmic kind of thing. It's a very political thing. So they do politically without any contradiction. I'm saying contradiction there are, because contradiction, why we read contradiction? Because we see BJP as a Brahmin Baniya party, Hindutva movement led by a Brahminical forces. But you know, the big shift has taken place in BJP politics. Now it's OBC led, Dalit mobilized, getting Dalit mobilization, supported by upper caste cultural psyche. So that kind of politics they have evolved. Recently you see the Karpuri Thakur giving the Bharat Ratna. It played a big role. It's a symbolic politics, but it affects the substantial political mobilization of India. So in this way, they have trying to include as much as possible. But problem is, if you have not yet acquired the capacity to aspire, how politics will reach to you? You have to, in democracy, you have to come on the door of democracy and knock the door. We are here. We want participation. If you don't cry, you don't get a space. So for the capacity to cry, now this free, what we call free pension, ration, we say, "Arey, ye to muft mein batwara ho raha hai." But you see the role of this free distribution of the ration. When it goes to a most marginal village family, what they do? 5 kilo, 5 aadmi, 25 kilo. 25 kilo you can't eat. You sell 20 kilos and you give your son to go to the school, paisa, kapda, and he goes to the school. You can take a chota sa thela and you can start your business. So pension money comes to you, thoda paisa bacha kariye, you can. So in that way, it's evolving capacity to the most marginal. I am saying those who can't have a capacity to earn the bread and butter for 2 meals, 2 times. Unke liye this free weaves, what we call, and we criticize, plays very important role. But you have to very successfully distribute those resources to the most marginal. And the need of their politics is they have to go there, because the dominant upper OBC, dominant Dalit are mobilized by other political groups. So they need those who are not yet politically mobilized. So this is the demand of the time of their politics, that they have to go to there and involve them and cast. Ab jo caste system has changed or not, that is not in their hand. Even RSS, you can see the change in the profile of the pracharaks. Earlier, you see most of the pracharaks comes from Maharashtra, mostly from Brahmins. Now you can see everywhere the pracharaks are evolving. Not Brahmin, Kashi Prant, where I live, the pracharak is from Pasi community. So Dalits, OBCs, they are entering in their domain, and that is the need of the time. I think वो नहीं है कि कोई आप अध्यात्म करने जा रहे हैं. That's a need of the time, and they are changing themselves. So caste, but caste, India is a caste-ridden country. I think it's very difficult to come out from that. It's not in hand of anyone. I'll tell you my story if you ask in the last question about how it's difficult to come out from the caste.
I was actually, I have a couple of minutes, so I'm trying to decide what to ask you first. But I think I will ask you about your more personal journey as a poet and a writer. You have explored caste, I mean, not just caste, but identity through your social work, through your writing, your non-fiction writing, but also through your poetry. What is it that poetry allows you to explore and understand better when it comes to how we identify ourselves and what the expressions of those identities are, particularly in society and politics? And in this context, if I may ask a personal question, I hope you'll allow me. you made the choice to drop your surname from your byline. And I've often wondered, because a lot of times when I've written on certain issues, my surname has been picked up, very rightfully so, and it's been called to question in terms of my point of view on that subject. As a writer, does it allow you to be more honest? Does it allow you to be read more honestly?
Yeah, thank you for asking this question. Actually, let me begin from here, that identity plays certain time as empowering role, but after certain time it plays as what we call snake or rope. It plays the role of a snake, no? It starts biting you. I tell you, as a identity, I worked on identity movement since 40 years. And I work on Dalit movement basically, and visiting to village, working with the community. But when I was studying in a school, we were thinking that caste nahi hona chahiye. So I dropped my caste names, Badri Narayan, no? Badri Narayan Tiwari. Secondly, I used to write poetry. So I thought that it's a very unpoetic name, Badri Narayan Tiwari. Itna bada lamba naam. Poetry needs a smaller name and rhythmic. So that name is not rhythmic. So a name is identity. I wrote a poem also. मेरे अपने नाम के अर्थ में कैसा नाम दे दिया है मुझे मेरे पिता, मैं अपने नाम के अर्थ में बिंद सा गया हूँ. नाम आपको अपने अर्थ में बांध देता है. तो I wanted to come out from the meaning of my name. And I start writing my social science writing, Badri Narayan, also poetry, Badri Narayan. But when I went Videsh, always everywhere, Tiwari, no? First name is Tiwari. So Tiwari returned back when he started going to foreign countries for studying or delivering lectures. Secondly, when I became professor in JNU, तो जो भी थोड़ा सा हिंदी में भी कह लूँ, जो भी हमारे साथ के दलित स्कॉलर्स थे, जो इनको डर हो रहा था कि ये तो एक ब्राह्मण आदमी दलितों पर 30 साल से काम कर रहा है, he is well accepted among community, तो they started reviving my caste names. So they put poster on various places in JNU whenever my article published in the newspaper, Badri Narayan Tiwari ka lekh padhiye. Because they want to say, no, don't trust on him, he's Brahmin. So that kind of problem, so it's very difficult to come out from the caste. So after 40 years, again I came back within the, jahan se maine shuru kiya tha. So it's very difficult to come out from the caste in India. And that also creating problem in the literary domain, in creative domain, as a writer. What is in the hand of writer? It is empathy. You write on others through empathy. But identity politics says, no, I am woman, we can't write on me. I am Dalit, you can't write on me. So what author will do, what writer will do, what poet will do? If you can't write on yourself, always every day on yourself, you have to write on other experiences. And other experiences through empathy, but identity politics is taking your empathy, instrument of empathy every day. And that is why the literary spheres are being fragmented, fractured, very micro, and losing its broader message and broader impact. That's the, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Badriji. Coming to you, Vasu. Vasu has just published, of course, I'm sure all of you know him from television, you know him as a star journalist, but he's recently with co-authors published a wonderful book called Love, Jihad and Other Fictions, and it's just had a thunderous launch in Delhi, so it's fresh off the press. And you know, when Yascha was talking about an alternative constructive politics, I was in fact thinking that that would be a perfect bridge to start talking about your book, because you take journalistic scrutiny to try and bust myths that have become the mainstay of right-wing populism. What is it that made you want to take this project on?
Right. Thanks very much, Pragya, and of course JLF. As you mentioned, this is a co-authored book. I have two fine co-authors, Supriya Sharma and Maryam Alvi, so I'm in a way a sort of spokesperson for them as well. Essentially, Pragya, as you know, that, and we are increasingly becoming aware of this, that democracies function and thrive when they're built on a bedrock of certain shared facts and shared truths. And we're seeing the world over what happens when those shared facts and shared truths face a threat. Now, in India, across political parties and ideologies, governments, leaders routinely either lie outright or massage, the facts. This is not a new thing. But something has substantively worsened in the past decade. And this is now not necessarily me saying it. The World Economic Forum in its latest report says that India faces the greatest risk from false information, from fake news, even more than pandemics, droughts, and floods. We're the number one, the Vishwa Guru, when it comes to false information and fake news. What has made this moment doubly dangerous is that these falsehoods are being perpetuated by the highest levels of power. So the dangerous idea that somehow minorities in this country, Muslims and Christians, who make up between them barely 16%, are posing a threat to over 1 billion Hindus through these conspiracy theories, whether it is suggesting that there's a Muslim plot to overwhelm India through population jihad, or even somewhat farcically a similar Christian plot, like Christians are 2% of this country, but there's a Christian conversion plot to overwhelm India, is being given voice by ministers, MPs, MLAs, legislators of the ruling establishment. Not only that, and this is again one of the reasons why we focused on these sets of theories, many of these theories are actually being passed into law. What we call today's WhatsApp forward is tomorrow's law. Now take something like love jihad. The Home Ministry itself has told Parliament that it doesn't exist as a legal concept. That hasn't prevented a number of ruling party politicians from scaremongering about love jihad, the fact that there's a Muslim plot to seduce and convert Hindu women from the election stage. A number of BJP-run states have actually passed, as you know, anti-love jihad laws, which essentially are criminalizing interfaith marriages in this country. Interfaith marriages are only 2% of all marriages. It's a very fragile, beautiful institution in a diverse country like ours, and yet it's facing an astonishing political and legislative assault. As a result of this, scores of young Hindu-Muslim couples, their marriages are being disrupted, the Muslim men are being arrested and thrown in jail. The cases drag on. At some point, they'll come out on bail because these are all consensual relationships. But the impact it's having on us as a society is that it's deeply dividing us, it's poisoning the collective well, it's turning not just Hindus against Muslims, but even Hindus against each other. We're all having these raging battles on our WhatsApp groups, family WhatsApp groups, school groups, where someone is forwarding some theory about, Muslims were given special favors by Manmohan Singh, or isn't Aftab Shraddha an example of love jihad? So our idea was because television, where I've largely been working, is an ephemeral medium, was to try to debunk these theories using the tools of journalism, hard facts, no opinion, and put it in a book which is a little more enduring. So whether you're a citizen of India who's arguing with an angry WhatsApp uncle, or you're a media practitioner, or even if you're part of the overall political architecture, you'll have these handy facts where you can do whatever little bit is possible to push back against this tidal wave of falsehoods and disinformation, which is both engulfing us and dividing us.
That's right. If there was an ideal world, I would make its motto hard facts and no opinion. However, in the times that we live in, and this is something Yascha was talking about, Badriji was talking about, the dominant discourses tend to be emotionally appealing. Now, even that's true even of woke ideology in many ways. There's a great emotional lure. And we know this better than most, that storytelling is at the heart of everything. And at a time when there's so much competitive narrative building, storytelling, and emotions are being deployed left, right, and center to try and manipulate how we think and about ourselves and about our country, what does it take to hold on to the belief that facts count?
Well, so here's the challenge. Firstly, a lot of these theories, these falsehoods are political falsehoods. Let's be clear, they're voiced by those in power and they serve the interests of power. So the response ultimately has to be political, right? We as media practitioners can only inhabit the world that we know, which is, of course, the world of facts and data and so on. But our attempt was, speaking to your point about how do you manage to reach out across the echo chamber, because our idea is not to just simply preach to the choir, but to reach out to what we think is a large, sensible middle of Indians who are looking at all of this and wondering, hey, maybe there is something to this. Maybe there is something like population jihad or love jihad, because you're being bombarded with it all the time. So how do you manage to do that? Now, one of the ways is obviously not to be condescending or dismissive about these theories, right? Like, when you come across a WhatsApp forward or a claim that Shah Rukh Khan is involved with population jihad because he's a Muslim man and he's married to a Hindu woman and he's produced 3 children, or anything like that, your immediate response would be to, if you're a sort of conventionally sensible person, dismiss it. Or as a journalist, you say this is rubbish. So our approach was not to be condescending, but to treat these theories as if we were approaching a conventional hard news investigative project. So we crunched through parliamentary records, we looked at government data, we filed right to information responses, we did good old-fashioned shoe leather reporting to try to debunk these theories. We presented these in a very dispassionate manner without weighing in at all on our own personal beliefs, so that the readers can make up their own mind. We also, Pragya, tried to use a little bit of the grammar of the fact-checking universe, because fact-checkers now are a big part of this pushback against viral falsehoods. And if you see the manner in which we formatted our book, we've kept it as a kind of claim conclusion. So every chapter, like let's say we're tackling this idea of population jihad, there's a number of subsections, there's a claim and a conclusion. So it makes for somewhat easy reading for those who may not have the appetite to plow through something which is dense and academic. So there are different ways of trying to, in a sense, make facts and make hard evidence palatable. Of course, viral lies always tend to have more traction than viral truths. But I still feel that there is an audience for this. I think people are hungry for facts and are hungry for information, as long as you don't feel like you're being bombarded by opinion or by subjectivity. And you're also presenting it in a in a kind of a simple, readable manner. So that's kind of what we've attempted. I don't know, how successful it's going to be, but I think it's, it's an intervention in a sense you had to make if you're reporting or chronicling this moment. So.
Very final question to you, Vasu. We've been talking about how impossibly our discourse, our societies politically have become divided along ideological lines. And there's nothing more symptomatic of it than the media, if you look at it today. And there are 2 aspects to it. One part of it is perhaps that there's been a vast shift in what is acceptable as journalism. You've seen that from within over the decades. And the other thing is the trust in media. It's become commonplace to identify a journalist or a news channel or a newspaper with a particular point of view. For example, if people like yourself, your colleagues get trolled so often on social media, and what you have to say will be dismissed as motivated, as woke, as elitist, and the other side as well. I mean, this happens to across the lines. At a time like this, is there anything that can be, how do you define, because one of your identities after so many decades, I suppose, is journalist. How do you define your dharma as a journalist, and do you think this is unsalvageable?
I think I might be too old to be labeled as woke, but if someone's choosing to use that, I'll take that as a sort of, inverse compliment. Look, it's a very vast discussion to get into the state of the media and the role that they've played in this moment. Of course, one immediately goes into this defensive mode when one is calling out what we're seeing right now, this extraordinary majoritarian shift in this country. You know that you're going to be labeled as part of some kind of anti-BJP, anti-Modi, anti-Hindu brigade. That doesn't prevent us as journalists from just carrying on our work in good faith, knowing that we're basing everything that we're making on verifiable facts and not subjective opinions. But I think that one of the great sort of, one of the great sort of perils of our time in the media has been that everything is rendered into a debate. Everything is sort of he said, she said. There's this compulsive urge to create a both sidesism, when actually the job of the media is to look at the available evidence and tell your readers or viewers that there is something like a kind of verifiable truth, right? And that's so true of what, for example, we're tackling with this book, where if you look at how these theories and themes are recycled in primetime discussions, it's always, love jihad, is it real or not? Or is it true that Muslims are going to over in India, etc., etc. While the facts and the data are not that hard to access, and you can easily go through it, and you can come to a conclusion that, listen, this stuff is not true. It's either outright false, or it's built, or there may be a kernel of facts on which a mountain of falsehoods are built. But I think, unfortunately, both because the media has now to the large extent become propagandists of the government, and also because this kind of journalism does require work, we're seeing a kind of collapse of the fourth estate as a guardrail of democracy. But at the same time, I'd say when you talk about trolling and the kind of, the kind of risks that you might face as a journalist, and I also briefly, after I left NDTV, I taught journalism for a semester at Jindal, and it was quite a challenge to convince a bunch of young people who are entering our profession where there doesn't seem to be much hope. I was saying, look, there's another side to this, right? In our generation, we're witnessing something we never thought we'd see, that this wonderful, diverse country of ours, with all its flaws, is becoming a majoritarian state, is turning into a Hindu Rashtra. Now, if you are in any way a media practitioner who is able to capture and chronicle this moment, then it is, it's both terrible, but it's also an extraordinary opportunity. Because how many people are actually telling those stories? So I think, in a strange way, this has given us a kind of agency, and this has given us a sense of purpose that we may not have in ordinary times. And I think that's something, that we shouldn't forget.
The ambiguous blessing of may you live in interesting times. I have 52 seconds, so I'm going to take it back to you, Yascha, just for the last words. You write, of course, it's not to say that your book is only relevant to what's happening in America, but that's the standpoint you're writing from. You've just heard Badri and Vasu talk about how some of these themes relate to India. And I was wondering what you make of, is there a universalism to what's going on in terms of ethno-nationalism and the left's inability to combat it across the world? Are there common themes?
In 18 seconds or less. Yes, in a lot of my work before this book, I've written about the rise of authoritarian populism in countries around the world. And you see that in different parts of the political spectrum. So, Donald Trump and Recep Erdogan in Turkey and Viktor Orban in Hungary are all on the right. But there's also people like Hugo Chavez on the left. And what they have in common is a claim to say, we truly represent the people, and only we represent the people, and anybody who disagrees with us is by virtue of that fact illegitimate, is by virtue of that fact a traitor to the people. And yes, I think that these forces have been successful in part because in many countries there were weaknesses in the institutions and in the old elites, because often the old elite was somewhat corrupt, because often the institutions had lost the favor population, because sometimes they were looking down on average people, and because sometimes they were giving up on those universal values. And so I think what we need to do in order to fight for democracy and equality and tolerance is to live our values, is to demonstrate that we are capable of sustaining societies in which we live up to the historical ambition to treat each other as equals, to see the humanity in each other, and to build that mutual solidarity across historical hierarchies. And that ultimately is going to be the only way to beat back.
Thank you so much, Yascha. Thank you, Badri. Thank you, Vasu. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. I'm sorry I couldn't take questions, but I hope you appreciate that I had a very challenging task to finish all of this within 50 minutes. Their books are available and they will be signing books. I hope you'll buy them. I hope you'll read them. Thank you.